It was early morning when the trucker started his day. The sky was painted with pale streaks of pink and orange as the sun struggled to rise. He yawned and stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from years on the road. Being a trucker wasn't easy. Long hours, empty highways, and the constant hum of tires on asphalt could make anyone tired. But he liked it. He liked the freedom of the road, the quiet that came when the world was still asleep, and the small moments that made life feel real. He went through his usual routine. First, a quick check of the truck. Tires, brakes, engine, everything had to be perfect. A truck was more than just a vehicle. It was a lifeline. One small mistake could turn a normal day into a disaster. As he walked around, checking the lights and mirrors, he noticed a fellow driver sipping coffee nearby. They nodded at each other. No words were needed. Truckers often shared these silent connections. Built from years of understanding the road and its challenges, the news had been talking about a storm moving in. A tornado had been reported in a neighboring town, and weather alerts warned that it might head this way. He listened to the warnings but didn't panic. Tornadoes were dangerous, yes, but he had driven through storms before. Careful planning and experience could get him through most situations. He packed his lunch, double-checked his maps, and climbed into the cab of his truck. The diesel engine rumbled to life and he merged onto the highway. The highway was surprisingly busy for such an early hour. Families in cars, people heading to work, and a few travelers on long journeys were all sharing the road. He noticed a small car with a young mother and her child struggling to keep pace with the speed limit. A couple of cars ahead, a man in a sharp suit was adjusting his tie, clearly stressed about being somewhere important. None of them knew what the morning had in store. None of them could imagine how quickly life could change. The trucker liked to drive with calm and focus. He kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, feeling the vibrations of the truck beneath him. He knew every sound, every movement of the vehicle. It was like an extension of himself. He thought about his own family back home, the small apartment he shared with his dog, and the simple joy of a hot cup of coffee in the quiet of the morning. Thoughts like these helped him stay grounded, even as the news alerts on the radio grew more urgent. Then it happened. The sky darkened unnaturally fast. Clouds rolled in like angry waves, swallowing the light of the sun. The wind began to pick up, rattling the truck's mirrors and shaking the small trees lining the highway. He glanced at the radio. Tornado warning. Take immediate shelter. But there was nowhere to hide on this stretch of road. The trees and signs whipped violently as gusts of wind surged. He gripped the wheel tighter, his instincts kicking in. Ahead he saw a car swerving dangerously, its driver clearly panicked. A family inside was struggling to keep control. The man in the suit was looking around frantically, eyes wide with fear. The trucker didn't hesitate. He slowed down, maneuvering his truck in a way that could shield the smaller vehicle if the worst happened. A piece of debris, a broken signpost, suddenly lifted into the air. He hit the horn, warning the drivers, and kept his focus sharp. The tornado hit with a force that was terrifying. The wind screamed like a living thing, tossing cars like toys. Rain pelted the windshield, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The trucker's heart raced, but he didn't panic. Years of experience had taught him to stay calm. He adjusted the truck, inching closer to the swerving car. With careful precision, he created a barrier between it and the worst of the wind. His own truck rocked violently, but he held it steady, muscles straining, mind completely focused on protecting the strangers. Inside the small car, the mother held her child close, praying silently. The man in the suit gritted his teeth, trying to remain calm. And then the impossible seemed to happen. The trucker managed to guide the car into a small depression on the side of the road, using his own truck as a shield. The wind battered them, but they were no longer directly in its path. Other vehicles were not so lucky. Some were overturned or pushed off the road. It was chaos, but in the midst of it, the trucker's actions had saved lives. After the initial fury passed, the trucker jumped out of his cab. Rain drenched him immediately, but he didn't notice. He went to each vehicle, helping people out and checking for injuries. The mother and child clung to him, grateful beyond words. The man in the suit looked at him with a mixture of awe and relief. I don't know how to thank you, he stammered. The trucker waved him off, focusing instead on keeping everyone safe. Let's get out of here, he said. There's still danger. He guided the survivors to the relative safety of his truck. Inside the cab, he tried to make them as comfortable as possible, giving blankets he kept for emergencies, sharing what little food he had, and offering water. The small space was tense, filled with the sound of wind and the smell of wet clothes, but the trucker's calm presence helped. He reassured them that help would come soon, though he knew it could take time. As they waited, the trucker learned a little about the people he had saved. The mother spoke quietly about her child's school, the couple shared stories of their road trip, and the man in the suit remained mostly silent, observing quietly. The trucker didn't pry. He had learned long ago that listening was sometimes more important than speaking. Everyone shared glances and small smiles, the kind that come from facing danger together. Hours passed slowly. The storm moved on, leaving destruction in its wake. Trees were down, signs were missing, and the highway was a mess of debris. But everyone was alive, thanks to one man who had acted without thinking of himself. The trucker finally allowed himself to breathe, checking the small group for injuries. A few scratches, some bruises, but nothing life-threatening. Relief washed over him, but it was quiet relief. He had no need for applause or recognition. The first emergency vehicles began to arrive, their sirens cutting through the still strong wind. The trucker directed the survivors out of the truck, helping them into the waiting ambulances and rescue vehicles. When the man in the suit finally stepped forward, he removed his hat and extended his hand. "You saved our lives," he said simply. There was no exaggeration in his voice, only sincerity. The trucker nodded, saying nothing more than, "Just glad you're all okay." Even as the adrenaline faded, he felt the weight of what had just happened. A tornado had come without warning, and lives had been saved through quick thinking, courage, and a willingness to act. He climbed back into his cab, feeling the familiar comfort of the driver's seat. Outside, the world was quiet now, the storm moving on, leaving behind a road littered with debris but also with the unspoken bonds of survival. Driving on, he looked in the rearview mirror. The people he had saved were being attended to by paramedics. He didn't know who the man in the suit really was, and for now it didn't matter. Heroes didn't need recognition. He had done what he knew was right, and that was enough. The highway stretched ahead, empty once more, sunlight beginning to break through the clouds. He thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly things could change, and how ordinary people could become heroes in moments that no one could predict. With a deep breath, he settled back into the rhythm of the road, ready to continue his journey, knowing that today he had made a difference. The storm grew stronger with each passing minute. The wind howled like an angry beast, tossing debris across the highway. Trees bent like they were made of paper. Signs twisted and cracked, and rain fell in sheets that made visibility almost zero. The trucker gripped the wheel tightly, feeling the vibrations of the truck as it rocked with the force of the gusts. His heart raced, but he kept his mind sharp. Panicking now would only make things worse. He could see other vehicles struggling in the storm. A small car was spinning dangerously, sliding toward the shoulder of the road. He acted instantly. Steering carefully, he positioned his truck to block the smaller car from being thrown into the ditch. The wind tried to push the vehicles apart, but the trucker's weight and experience held them steady. Every second felt like an eternity, and every choice could mean life or death. Inside the car, the young mother clutched her child tightly. Her knuckles were white and her eyes were wide with fear. "It's going to be okay," the trucker shouted over the roar of the wind, trying to calm her. "Hold on, I've got you." His voice was steady, a rock in the middle of chaos. He could see the man in the suit gripping the dashboard, teeth clenched, trying not to panic. The storm didn't care about who they were or where they were going. It only cared about destruction. A piece of metal flew through the air like a missile, missing the small car by inches. The trucker ducked instinctively, then steered with even more precision, positioning the truck as a barrier. "Keep your head down," he yelled. The mother lowered her child, pressing him to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain, but from sheer relief that someone was there to protect them. The man in the suit nodded silently, finally trusting that they would survive if they stayed under the truck's shield. The tornado itself was visible now in the distance, a dark twisting funnel that churned everything in its path. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Cars were lifted, roofs ripped off buildings, and anything not nailed down was thrown into the air. The trucker's eyes narrowed, calculating the safest route. He could feel the ground tremble beneath him, and he knew they had little time before the storm hit fully. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted nearby. A tree fell across the road, blocking part of their path. The mother screamed, clutching her child, and the man in the suit froze, unsure what to do. The trucker didn't hesitate. He shifted gears, maneuvering his massive truck around the obstacle. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong turn could send them all into disaster. As he guided the truck past the fallen tree, a piece of roof flew past, narrowly missing the windshield. He felt a sharp jolt but held steady. The highway was a battlefield. Vehicles overturned, debris everywhere, and frightened people trying to survive. The trucker noticed another car pinned near the median, its engine dead, smoke rising from the hood. He knew he couldn't leave them behind. Slamming the brakes carefully, he reversed toward the stranded car, signaling the occupants to move quickly. "Come with me," he shouted over the roar of the wind. A family climbed into the truck, shaking and soaked. The trucker guided them into a safer spot in the cab, making room where he could, handing them blankets he kept in the back for emergencies. Inside the cab, the atmosphere was tense but alive. The mother tried to soothe her child, whispering comforting words while the man in the suit tried to maintain his composure, though fear lingered in his eyes. The trucker's hands moved automatically, checking each person quickly, ensuring no one had been seriously hurt. He handed out water from his small supply and encouraged everyone to take deep breaths. "We're not out of this yet," he said calmly. "But we'll make it." The tornado drew closer and the trucker had to think fast. He noticed a low-lying ditch nearby, which could offer some protection if they stayed inside the truck. With careful steering, he drove toward it, avoiding fallen branches and debris. The truck rocked violently with each gust of wind, and the rain slammed against the cab with incredible force. Yet, despite the chaos, he never wavered. Every decision was focused on survival. A particularly strong gust lifted a part of a trailer from a nearby truck, sending it spinning through the air. The trucker ducked instinctively, then accelerated slightly to avoid it. The small families and travelers inside the cab held on tight, feeling the truck shift with the force of the wind. The man in the suit finally spoke. I've never seen anything like this," he said, his voice trembling. You're saving us." The trucker nodded, not looking at him. "Just focus on staying calm," he replied. "That's the most important thing right now." Minutes felt like hours. The tornado passed over them, but the storm wasn't over. Debris continued to fly. Branches snapped off trees, and the rain hammered the cab relentlessly. Outside, the world seemed unrecognizable. Cars were crushed, signs torn away, and buildings damaged. But inside the truck, there was a sense of shared determination. Everyone realized that staying calm, following the trucker's instructions, and trusting him was their best chance to survive. The trucker's experience and instincts were the key to getting through the storm. He knew how to position the vehicle to minimize wind impact, how to anticipate flying debris, and how to keep everyone safe inside the cab. His voice, calm but firm, guided the frightened passengers. "Stay low.
Keep your hands and arms inside.
Don't move unless you have to." Simple instructions, but they made all the difference. Finally, the worst part of the storm began to move away. The wind died down slightly and the rain became less violent. The highway was a mess, littered with debris, but everyone inside the truck was alive and relatively unharmed. The trucker took a moment to breathe, feeling the tension leaving his body in slow waves. The mother hugged her child tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. The man in the suit finally allowed himself to relax, looking around at the small group he had just survived with. Even as the storm moved on, the trucker didn't let his guard down. He carefully drove along the damaged highway, helping the stranded families navigate around fallen trees and overturned cars. His focus never wavered, even when exhaustion began to creep in. Every life mattered, and he wasn't about to let anyone get hurt if he could prevent it. The first sounds of emergency sirens in the distance brought hope. Rescue teams were arriving, ready to help those in need. The trucker guided the survivors out of the truck one by one, making sure everyone was accounted for. The mother thanked him repeatedly, unable to find words strong enough to express her gratitude. The man in the suit finally spoke again, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. The trucker smiled faintly. "Just glad you're safe," he replied simply. Even as he helped the last of the survivors, he didn't think about recognition. For him, this was just doing the right thing. He had spent years on the road facing storms, accidents, and emergencies, helping people, protecting lives, It was what he knew he had to do. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him tired but satisfied. Today, he had made a real difference. He watched as emergency crews began their work, checking cars, helping the injured, and clearing debris. The tornado had left destruction behind, but it had also revealed courage, quick thinking, and the quiet heroism of a man who had chosen to act when it mattered most. The trucker climbed back into his cab, feeling the familiar hum of the engine beneath him. Outside, the world was damaged, yes, but it was alive and people were safe. That was enough. Driving on, he thought about the morning, the storm, and the lives he had helped save. There was no glory in what he had done, no audience waiting to cheer him on. Just a highway, the open road, and the knowledge that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary moments when needed. The man in the suit would remember this day. The families would remember it. But most of all, he would remember it too, not for pride, but for the quiet satisfaction of having done what was right. The sun began to break through the clouds, casting a soft glow on the wet highway. Puddles reflected the shattered sky, and broken branches lined the road like scars from the storm. The trucker took a deep breath, adjusting his mirrors, checking his route, and preparing to continue. Life would return to normal soon, but the memory of this morning would stay with him forever. In that moment, he felt a connection to everyone he had saved. Strangers who had become part of a shared experience that would never be forgotten. They had faced fear together, trusted one another, and survived. And through it all, the trucker had remained steady, calm, and focused, a quiet hero on an ordinary morning that had turned into something extraordinary. The storm had passed, but the highway was far from safe. Fallen branches, scattered debris, and overturned vehicles lined the road like markers of the chaos that had just passed. The trucker eased his rig forward slowly, scanning the wreckage for anyone still in need. His mind was alert, eyes sharp, every muscle ready to react. The adrenaline from the storm still coursed through his veins, but now it was mixed with relief that everyone he had guided to safety was alive. Inside the cab, the atmosphere was quiet, but heavy. The mother still held her child tightly, whispering soft reassurances, though her voice trembled slightly. The little boy clung to his mother, wide-eyed, still trying to understand what had just happened. Fear lingered, but there was also a spark of gratitude. He had survived, and that fact was both confusing and miraculous to him. The man in the suit, who had been quiet for most of the journey, finally spoke, his voice low and cautious. You saved our lives back there." His words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The trucker nodded, keeping his focus on the road. "Just doing what anyone would if they could," he said, though he knew most people wouldn't have had the calm or the experience to act so quickly. The small families inside the cab began to open up. They told stories of how they ended up on that highway that morning. The mother explained they were trying to get her child to school before an important test. The boy listened quietly, still processing everything. Another traveler spoke about their long drive to visit a sick relative, their voice trembling as they described the near misses and the fear that had taken over them during the storm. The trucker listened without interrupting. He didn't need to speak. Sometimes just hearing someone was enough. As the truck continued slowly along the damaged road, a sense of connection began to form among the passengers. They had shared something extraordinary, something that had forced them to rely on a stranger in the midst of danger. The trucker's calmness and skill had become the center of their survival, and gratitude mixed with a quiet awe for the man who had risked his own life without hesitation. The man in the suit, though still composed, began to observe the trucker more closely. He noticed the way the trucker's hands moved, steady and confident even after everything they had gone through. He noticed the quiet authority in his voice, the calm reassurance, and the instinctive decisions that had kept them alive. Something about him demanded respect, not because of titles or accolades, but because of courage and integrity. The trucker spoke sparingly, offering practical advice and guidance. "We need to keep moving," he said. "There are areas ahead that are flooded or blocked. Follow me closely. Don't stop unless I tell you." His instructions were simple, clear, and firm. The mother nodded, still holding her child, while the man in the suit followed silently, trusting him without question. In that moment, the trucker wasn't just a driver. He was a guide, a protector, a quiet leader in a world suddenly made dangerous. Hours passed slowly as they navigated the damaged highway. The storm had left a trail of destruction. Power lines down, trees snapped, vehicles overturned. Yet the cab of the truck was a small island of calm amid the chaos. Conversations started to take on a quieter, reflective tone. People shared thoughts, fears, and little memories. One traveler spoke about how fragile life could be, how a single moment could change everything. The mother shared a small story about her child's first day of school last year, laughter slipping through the tension, a brief relief from fear. The trucker listened to each story, offering words of comfort when he could. "You're safe now," he said gently to the mother and child. "That's the most important thing." Simple words, but they carried the weight of experience, and the reassurance in his voice helped calm frayed nerves. The man in the suit remained mostly quiet, still taking everything in, but there was a respect forming between him and the trucker that didn't require words. As they moved, the trucker began noticing the smaller details around them. A car with a broken window, a small dog trapped in a yard, a person walking in shock along the roadside. He made small stops, helping where he could, showing that his concern went beyond those who had already climbed into his cab. He moved with purpose, but there was no rush, just a steady determination to do what was right. Inside the cab, conversations grew more personal. The mother began asking the trucker questions about himself. "How long have you been driving trucks?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A long time. Too long sometimes," he replied, a hint of humor in his voice. She laughed softly, the first genuine laugh since the storm began. "You must have seen a lot out here," she said. He nodded. "A lot. You see the best and the worst, but mostly, you see people trying their best." The man in the suit finally joined the conversation. "I've met a lot of people in my life," he said thoughtfully, "but not many who act like you did today. Calm, fearless, focused on others instead of yourself." The trucker didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road, but there was a quiet pride in his expression. "I just did what needed to be done," he said. "You don't always get a choice in the moment." Despite the exhaustion from the storm, the passengers found comfort in the trucker's presence. He became more than just a driver. He was a symbol of safety, reliability, and humanity. They shared small laughs, memories, and reflections, each person revealing a little more of themselves. Even the man in the suit, who had maintained a reserved exterior, allowed himself a small smile now and then, appreciating the human connection that had formed under extraordinary circumstances. As the cab moved further along the highway, the trucker began planning the best route to safety. He had a sense of the terrain ahead, knew which roads were likely blocked, and anticipated areas that could still be dangerous. He made decisions with precision, consulting the map occasionally but relying mostly on experience and intuition. The passengers trusted him implicitly, understanding that he had already proven his ability to protect them. During a brief pause, the mother looked out the window, taking in the aftermath of the storm. The landscape was torn apart, trees uprooted, signs twisted, and vehicles abandoned. She shivered despite the truck's warmth. "It's hard to believe this all happened in just a few hours," she said softly. The trucker nodded, his eyes on the road. "Nature doesn't wait for anyone. But people can rise to it if they have to," he replied. The words hung in the air, simple but profound, and the passengers reflected on them silently. The little boy finally spoke, his voice small but curious. "Will it happen again?" he asked. The trucker glanced at him briefly. "Storms come and go, but you're stronger than you think, and you've already been brave today," he said. The boy hugged his mother tightly, feeling a little safer knowing that someone had been there to protect them. The trucker's words were gentle, honest, and comforting, an anchor in the aftermath of chaos. Time passed, and they continued moving through the wrecked landscape. Each stop brought small challenges, helping someone out of a stranded vehicle, avoiding flooded areas, guiding people to higher ground. The trucker never faltered, never lost focus. He was patient, calm, and unwavering. His actions created a sense of security that went beyond words. People began to look at him not just as a driver, but as someone they could trust completely in life or death situations. By the time they reached a safer stretch of highway, the group had formed an unspoken bond. They had shared fear, relief, gratitude, and respect. They had witnessed courage and leadership without the need for recognition or reward. Inside the cab, the conversations became more reflective, focusing on lessons learned and the importance of looking out for one another. The man in the suit finally spoke again, his voice quiet but sincere. "I don't think I'll ever forget today," he said. "Not just because of the storm, but because of you. How you stayed calm, helped everyone, and didn't think about yourself for a second." The trucker shrugged lightly. "You do what you can. That's all anyone can do." There was a quiet wisdom in his words, and the passengers felt it deeply. As they drove on, the sky slowly cleared. The sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light over the wet, battered landscape. The highway was still dangerous, but there was hope. The storm had passed, and survival had brought them closer together. Inside the cab, the atmosphere was lighter now, filled with cautious optimism. People smiled faintly, sharing small moments of conversation and laughter, realizing that life could continue even after such terrifying events. The trucker, still focused on the road, allowed himself a small moment to reflect. He had faced the storm, guided strangers to safety, and remained calm when panic could have taken over. It wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about doing what was right. And in that moment, he realized that courage wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and human. The first sounds of sirens in the distance brought a wave of relief to the trucker and the passengers. Emergency vehicles were arriving, their lights cutting through the aftermath of the storm. Ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars moved carefully along the damaged highway, helping stranded drivers and clearing debris. For the trucker, it was a sign that help had arrived, but his focus remained on the people in his cab. He needed to make sure everyone was safely transferred before he could relax. He guided the mother and her child toward an ambulance parked nearby. The paramedics were busy, but they acknowledged him with quick nods as he handed over the passengers. "They're okay," he said simply. The mother hugged her child tightly one last time, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the trucker with deep gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. The trucker shook his head. "Just take care of each other," he said. That was all the thanks he needed. Next, he helped the man in the suit out of the truck. The man had remained mostly quiet, observing everything that had happened, but now he spoke, his voice steady and sincere. "I owe you more than I can say," he said. The trucker looked him in the eye and gave a faint smile. "We made it through," he replied. "That's what matters." There was no arrogance in his tone, only quiet honesty. Paramedics and emergency personnel began asking questions, taking notes, and checking for injuries. The trucker answered simply and clearly, providing details of where people had been stranded, what hazards remained, and who needed the most urgent help. His calm, organized presence helped the emergency teams work efficiently. Despite being exhausted, he continued to prioritize others, moving with purpose and precision. While the chaos of rescue operations swirled around him, the trucker noticed people beginning to gather. Neighbors, drivers who had been stranded, and bystanders watched with admiration as he coordinated and assisted. Some offered to help, but he politely directed them to the professionals. He had done what he could, and now it was time to let trained personnel handle the rest. As the injured and stranded were guided away, the trucker stayed near the cab, keeping an eye on the group he had just saved. The mother and child were now in the care of paramedics, and they waved to him with grateful smiles. He nodded back, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. The man in the suit lingered, finally revealing something he had kept to himself throughout the ordeal. "I should probably tell you who I am," the man said, his tone serious but not boastful. The trucker raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "I'm a U.S. Senator," he said. The words hung in the air, but the trucker didn't react with surprise. Titles and positions didn't matter to him. He had acted the same way regardless. "Well," he said simply, "glad you're safe." The senator nodded, a small smile breaking through his composed exterior. The realization settled in. The trucker had saved someone very important, someone whose decisions affected millions of people, without even knowing it at the time. But he didn't dwell on it. Recognition wasn't why he had acted. He had done what needed to be done because it was right. The senator, however, felt compelled to express his gratitude. "I've met many people in my life," the senator said, "but I've never met anyone as calm and capable in a crisis as you. You saved lives today, and you did it without hesitation. I won't forget it. The trucker shrugged, a faint smile on his face. I just did my job, he replied. Anyone else would have done the same if they could. But the senator knew that not everyone could have. What the trucker had done required courage, quick thinking, and experience, all qualities that set him apart. Nearby, emergency workers were still busy with other survivors. The trucker moved to assist where he could, helping lift debris, guiding people to safe areas, and keeping the injured calm until paramedics arrived. He didn't seek recognition. His focus was entirely on others. Even the senator noticed this, impressed by the trucker's humility and dedication. Once the immediate danger was over and everyone he had saved was in safety, the trucker finally allowed himself a moment to rest. He leaned against the cab, letting out a long breath. The storm was gone, the highway was chaotic but manageable, and people were alive. That was enough. He didn't need applause or headlines. The knowledge that he had made a real difference was reward enough. The senator approached him again, offering a hand. You should be proud, he said. Not many people could do what you did today. You stayed calm, helped everyone, and didn't think about yourself for a second. The trucker shook his hand firmly, his eyes steady. I'll remember the people I helped, not myself, he said. His words were simple, but they carried a quiet wisdom. True heroism, he believed, was about others, not recognition. As the emergency teams finished their work, the trucker prepared to get back on the road. His rig had taken some damage from the storm, but it was still functional. He checked the tires, the brakes, and the engine quickly, ensuring everything was safe for the journey ahead. Even in exhaustion, he remained meticulous, knowing that safety was always the first priority. The senator lingered a moment longer, observing the trucker's careful routine. He realized that this man who had just saved his life was the kind of person who made the world safer simply by existing. Quiet, capable, and selfless. Qualities that were rare but invaluable. He extended his thanks one more time. If there's ever anything I can do for you, just ask, he said. The trucker nodded, accepting the words but not expecting anything in return. He didn't need favors or titles. He had already made a difference in a way that mattered most. The mother and child waved again as the trucker climbed back into the cab, and even the senator gave a small nod of appreciation. The trucker started the engine, feeling the familiar rumble beneath him. The highway stretched out ahead, damaged but passable, and the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. It was a new day, a day after the storm, and life was slowly returning to normal. As he drove away, he reflected on what had happened. The tornado had come without warning, creating fear and chaos, but it had also revealed something important. Courage, kindness, and humanity existed in everyday people. A trucker on a routine route, acting instinctively and selflessly, had saved lives, including someone of great importance. But for him, it had never been about recognition. It had always been about doing what was right. Even as the highway stretched on and the city began to appear in the distance, the memory of the storm lingered. Broken trees, scattered debris, and overturned vehicles were stark reminders of nature's power. Yet the trucker felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that in the midst of destruction, he had acted as a protector. Lives had been saved, and fear had been replaced with hope. The senator's gratitude continued to resonate with him. It was rare to meet someone who understood the value of courage without needing to show it off. The trucker had never thought about the significance of the person he had saved at the time. Titles didn't matter. What mattered was that someone needed help, and he had provided it. That realization brought a sense of calm, even as the storm's aftermath stretched on around him. Emergency workers continued to clear the highway, and the trucker offered what assistance he could before finally preparing to continue his route. He checked the rig one last time, adjusted the mirrors, and shifted gears. As he merged onto the open road, he felt the familiar rhythm of driving settle over him, a comforting constant after the chaos of the morning. He thought about the people he had saved, the mother and her child, the travelers, and the man who turned out to be a U.S. senator. Their lives had been changed, even if just for a day, because he had acted without hesitation. That quiet, unassuming heroism was something he carried with him, not for recognition, but because it was part of who he was. The sun climbed higher in the sky, drying the wet asphalt and casting long shadows across the highway. Life was beginning to return to normal, but for the trucker, the day had already been extraordinary. He had faced fear, guided strangers to safety, and remained calm when panic could have taken over. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone, including himself, that true courage often comes in quiet, selfless acts. As the city appeared on the horizon, the trucker felt a sense of closure. The storm was over. People were safe. And though he had no headlines, no accolades, and no public recognition, he had done something that mattered more than anything else. He had saved lives. The storm was over, but its effects were still visible everywhere. Trees were down, power lines lay twisted across roads, and debris covered stretches of highway. People were slowly returning to the roads, checking on neighbors and helping clear the damage. Despite the destruction, there was a sense of relief in the air. Lives had been saved and the worst had passed. The trucker drove through the aftermath, careful to avoid hazards, but his mind was already reflecting on what had happened. Even though he had helped strangers survive a terrifying tornado, he didn't see himself as a hero. To him, it had been instinct. When lives were at risk, hesitation wasn't an option. He had acted without thinking of recognition or reward. Yet the people he had saved and the emergency teams he had assisted already knew the truth. His courage and quick thinking had made a real difference, and the memory of his actions would stay with them forever. The mother and her child had been reunited with relatives after being checked by paramedics. She had sent a small note of thanks through the emergency responders, but the trucker didn't see it immediately. The little boy had drawn a crayon picture of a truck and a tornado, with a figure protecting others, and his mother had hung it on the fridge. It was a small gesture, but it reminded the trucker that sometimes the impact of our actions is quietly recognized in ways we may never know. The man in the suit, the U.S. Senator, had returned to his work, but he hadn't forgotten the trucker. In conversations with colleagues, he mentioned the calm, skilled man who had saved them from the storm. He spoke not just about the danger they faced, but about the humanity he had witnessed. He emphasized that courage was not always found in grand speeches or public offices. Sometimes it was found in the quiet, steady actions of an ordinary person. For the trucker, the highway was slowly becoming familiar again. Traffic had resumed, and though the storm's scars were evident, people were moving forward. He noticed drivers who had been stranded or shaken by the storm, giving nods or thumbs up as they passed. It wasn't applause, but it was acknowledgement, a quiet, human connection that said, "We saw what you did," and it mattered. Driving through the small towns that had been affected, he saw neighbors helping one another, families checking in on each other, and strangers offering support. It was a reminder that even in disaster, people could come together. He thought about the morning's chaos, the terror of the tornado, the swirling winds, the sense of helplessness, and realized that human connection and courage had been the difference between fear and survival. At a small rest stop later in the day, he parked his truck, taking a moment to stretch and breathe. His body was tired, muscles sore, but his mind was still alert. He reflected on the events, replaying moments in his head, guiding the small car, keeping the mother and child calm, navigating the fallen tree, and even helping the man in the suit. Each memory was a reminder that actions, even quiet ones, could ripple outward and change lives. He thought about how easily the situation could have gone differently. A split-second hesitation, a wrong turn, or a panicked decision could have led to tragedy. But he had remained calm, relied on experience, and focused on what needed to be done. In that focus, he had found clarity and purpose. The storm had tested him, but it had also revealed a truth he already knew. When fear was faced with calm courage, lives could be saved. Word of his actions had begun to spread. Local news stations mentioned the trucker who helped during the tornado, emphasizing his skill, bravery, and humility. Social media users shared the story, praising his calmness and quick thinking, yet the trucker didn't follow these reports closely. Recognition was not his goal. He preferred to focus on the work ahead, the highway that stretched on, and the next delivery he had to make.